Okay, cool. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Michael Fischer. I'm a research scientist at Adobe Research. And this talk is going to be about material selection in 2D and beyond. And when I agreed to give the talk, I didn't realize that this was going to be 6 hours after the SIGGRAPH Asia deadline. So please bear with me. These slides are not super polished, but I guess we'll see what happens. I think Harpreet's introduction was a great segue to my talk actually, because like 51 does a lot of data, and one of the key lessons and key recurring things I will be talking about is data and the use of data and how we need to organize and keep track of data. So if you don't know me, a little bit about myself, I'm originally from Bavaria, Germany. I studied aerospace engineering in my undergrad and then computer science. Did my PhD at UCL in London, sponsored by Meta Reality Labs, and with Tobias and Niloy, my amazing supervisors. I interned a bunch at Meta and Adobe, and I joined Adobe as a research scientist last year. And last week, my thesis was awarded the Eurographics PhD award, which I'm really happy about. So this talk, again, is called Material Selection in 2D and 3D, well, 2D and beyond, it says. And I took the liberty to go a little bit further than what I presented at 3DV this year, because actually the 3DV paper that we're also going to talk about is the outcome or the continuation of a longer line of work. And I thought this would be maybe a nice opportunity and platform to present like this whole picture and how it ties in. A little bit of housekeeping or disclaimers. When I say material selection, what do I mean by that? Usually in our context, this means click-based, user-defined, and open set selection. So you're usually given an input image and the user-provided click. And from this click, you want to infer a mask of that image that covers all the material, all the pixels that have the same material. So here, the selection mask is red. You see all the wooden wall is in red. And on the right side, example, all the white netting is covered in green. And I apologize for the confusion with the mask colors, but you will see throughout the talk that these are all results from different papers, and we had different conventions and different ways of plotting things. So again, material selection, user click-based, and then you get a pixel mask that covers the same material. Now, what do I actually mean when I say material? Because that can be quite ambiguous. The definition we apply is that a material is a pattern with the same surface texture and reflectance property. So basically, it has the same like texture characteristics across random patches on the surface, and it looks the same when rendered. And maybe it'd be good to differentiate what we're not doing. We're not doing segmentation. We're not doing classification into predetermined classes like wood and plastic and this kind of stuff. And we're also not doing like generation or any of the other applications there are. Why is material selection hard? Well, I brought this image of the car here as a motivating example. Material response is usually, it's a physical process, right? So it's governed by the roughness of the material, by the BRDF, by the albedo, by the lighting, by how you look at it, by the surroundings, if it's a reflective material, and so on and so on. And as soon as you render an image, or actually if you take a picture, it's pretty much the same thing, you collapse all this physical information, where is the light, where is the view, onto a sensor and into an image. And you collapse this into basically three numbers into RGB. And from those, it's very hard to infer the material. For example, in this car, if you take this patch here, it's sort of like a red metallic thing. If you take this patch, it's the same material, right? But because this part is in shade, it's much darker. And if you take this patch, because there is a highlight here, you see that this is a much different color. So if you just look at the three RGB colors I plotted here, you wouldn't say that these are the same material. But of course, as a human, you know it's all the car's metallic hull, and you know this is the same material. So a quick outline. I'm going to be talking about 5 papers briefly. What this talk will be is going to be an overview. I hope to give you guys some lessons learned and hopefully also some takeaways that you can use in your respective research fields, because obviously not everybody here is a researcher in materials, probably not even in graphics or vision. I think we also have some folks from other fields. So I hope that you can take those takeaways and apply them in your research. What it won't be is hopefully scary math, lots of diagrams and tables with bold numbers, because those you need for getting the paper accepted, but that's already happened. So now we can focus on the nice stuff, actually like explaining and talking about cool things. Okay, so let's kick this off with the materialistic paper. This was a paper in SIGGRAPH 2023 by Praful Sharma and collaborators from Adobe as well. And this was really a seminal work in that space because they were the first to define this task of material selection in that way. What do I mean by this? Again, we've seen those examples, and those were mostly from this paper, right? So you have an input, you have a click, and you get a per pixel dense selection mask that explains your click and that covers all the material of this in the image. And as you've seen, this is really hard because you have shading differences, reflectance, and so on. Again, this is the definition that we apply materials, and I actually copied this from this paper. So this is their definition, and we're going to stick with this throughout most of this talk. So I'm going to briefly talk about how they do it, because this is going to be a building block for pretty much all the other methods we're going to look at. And it's surprisingly simple, but also really elegant and sophisticated. So again, as input, you have an image, right? And the click I marked here with this little red rectangle. And then we compute dyno features. Dyno VIT, I guess that's familiar to everyone, is a pre-trained large vision encoder, VIT actually vision transformer. And that has been pre-trained on billions of images. So it is really good, strong world priors. And you encode this image into dyno space. And from dyno space, you learn a small, very lightweight, learnable projection layer to project it to some other space. And then the authors propose to use a cross-attention mechanism where those features that we just encoded and projected are going to be the keys, and the patch embedding of your pixel is going to be the query. So if you're not familiar with attention, it's a mechanism that allows you to contrast two things in an image to tell the model, if you're given this, what in the image should you look at? So basically the keys signify where is stuff in the image, and the query means what are we looking at? And in this case, that means that we're looking for the material with, or the patch embedding of the material where the user clicked, and we're looking in the embedding of the image, so basically in the whole image space. And if you decode this, there's some other like projection layers and stuff that I abstracted away here. But if you decode it, this gives you such a selection mask. And why this works is because dyno contains such a rich prior, and we don't change it, right? Dyno's frozen, so you keep this prior. You just need like lightweight projection layers to adapt it to the material space. And the cool thing about this cross-attention between features and the clicked patch is that allows you to have arbitrary queries. You can click anywhere in the image. So you have this open set, open vocabulary selection that we wanted in the beginning. This is cool because you can actually do something crazy. Nobody says that the key and the image features have to come from the same image, right? So we can just use, for example, the top image to get the feature embeddings and the bottom image to get the patch embedding. So you click on the bottom image, but then with this architecture, you can transfer the semantic content there, your material that you want to select, to this initial image. So I think that was pretty cool at the time. And of course, I couldn't be giving a talk at Box 51 without talking about data. So this was trained on 50,000 images. They were all rendered, all synthetic images. So those come out of Blender. And the cool thing, if you have synthetic images, you can render dense material masks, right? So you have control over the scene and you can have per pixel annotations. And actually, if you think back what I presented about the architecture a second ago, nothing about that architecture is specific to materials. It's a purely data-driven learning task. So this is lesson number one, I would say. Data is key. It's all in the data, especially when we're using transformers and these kinds of models that have little inductive bias. all your knowledge is in the data and you want to have as much as you can to extract all those information. Okay, this was materialistic. Moving on to a paper that we published actually at SIGGRAPH Asia about a year ago. It's called fine-grained spatially varying material selection, but because that's a mouthful internally, we just call it materialistic 2. And this was in collaboration with Julia Guerrero Villo, who was intern at the time and who did great work. So in materialistic 2, we again have the same task. We want to click on an image and we want to select the material there, right? And if you remember this definition of materials, patterns with the same surface and reflectance properties, if you think about this, this is actually ambiguous, right? Because that definition will change with the scale or the field of view of your picture. If you zoom in, if you put the camera very close to your material, the same surface texture or a repetitive surface pattern will look very different than if you're like far away, right? So in this paper, we exploit this, or we extend the original selection task to a 2-level selection of texture and subtexture that vary with scale. So again, this is the materialistic that we see here, input and click, and then the materialistic mask that we get. And now in this new paper, materialistic 2, we're able to select on 2 levels. So if you click, for example, on the flowers on that dress, you can either get a selection mask for the flowers, or you can get a selection mask for the whole texture that includes the dress and the flowers. And once we started playing around with this, we found that there are a lot of images that have this, that are really these 2-level composition of texture and subtexture, right? So the key insight that made this project work was that we figured out that if we want to have multi-level selection, we need to do multi-level processing. And to do this, we take the input image and we first split it into 4 tiles. And then we also downscale it to the VIT input resolution. And then we process each of those segments with the VIT. So it's the same VIT as before. Actually, not quite the same. Now we use Dino V2 because in the time that came out and that worked better. But the concept is the same. You take the image, you get VIT features, but now you do it at different scales. And then with those scales, you can do some more tricks. I'm not going to go into detail here because we don't have the time. You can do some more tricks, like all this kind of stuff. This is basically learned projections and feature fusion and so on. Very similar to materialistic. We also use a paper from ICCV that year that's called S2 wrapper, and that again enhances that multi-scale detail. But the point is, after you've done all this fusing and projecting back and forth and so on, you can just use a simple linear layer to get your output to decode back into image space. Importantly, in 2 modularities, right? So you have texture and subtexture, which is precisely what we wanted. Now, this all comes back to the question of how do you train this thing? And of course, for training, you need data. So for multi-level selection, you need multi-level processing and of course, multi-level data. So we had to go back to our rendering script, to go back to Blender and create this data set actually. And to do this, we randomly took 12 patterns. There's a 12, like you can see here, like regular patterns. And the database of almost 11,000 materials. Those are PBR materials. So we have roughness, normals, albedo, metallic, and so on. And we took pairs of those materials and we combined them, we blended them with those masks. So here on the right of this figure, sorry, you see how those masks are blended into each other based on the patterns. And then we took them and we rendered them into scenes. So that gives you 800,000 rendered images with 2-level annotations. You have subtexture annotations and texture annotations. And you can already see lesson number 1 make a comeback here, how this is all about the data. So let's look at some results. Of course, I have to show some results to show you guys that it actually works. This is the input and the click. And you can see that predicted subtexture is only the red stripes on the skirt, whereas predicted texture correctly gives you the entire skirt. Again, on this pillow here, you can only get the white stripes, or you can get the entire pillow, depending on which level you choose in the model. And because we're doing this multi-scale processing, right, the VIT operates at a finer scale, so it doesn't only consume the whole image, it also consumes each quadrant separately. So we actually can get much finer resolution, as you can see here, where we can select the wallpaper on the back wall without the fine print. And if you only have a single level, for example, here on this white nightstand, multi-level selection doesn't really make sense, right? So the model just collapses to the usual task, I guess also what a human would do, and just gives you a single mask for both modalities, which is the expected behavior, and it's good. And of course, once you have those multi-level masks, you can do multi-level editing and then change things in Photoshop and make it look pretty. But I guess the lesson I want to convey here is that multi-scale is important. And this isn't just for data or model training. I did my PhD in, well, gradient descent-based optimization. And there, one of the key tricks is to optimize on a multi-scale resolution because your features blend better and your optimization will converge much better. I think this is a key, this in the optimization literature has been known for a long time. So this is a key insight that we should be taking into the machine learning literature as well, and always use multi-scale features and optimization. So a quick recap of those two papers, right? Materialistic and Materialistic 2. We're doing materialistic selection in 2D, and we have priors that help us and that work well, and multi-scale also helps with fidelity. And the two lessons we've learned, it's all in the data, and multi-scale is important. So this seems to work pretty well already, so like, what's left to do now? We were wondering the same last year, and we came across an image like this. This is an image of like a rustic living room where everything's made of wood, basically. Now, if you have a material selection model, as we had before, click-based, and you wanted to select all the wood in this image, you would need to click a bunch of times, right? And in different places, and you would need the user to do that, and that's kind of annoying. Wouldn't it be much nicer if you could just say wood, and it would give you a proper mask? This is the problem that we settled out to tackle in this year's SIGGRAPH paper MAO-AM, Unified Object and Material Selection with Vision Language Models, with our intern, Jaden Park. This has just been accepted to SIGGRAPH this year, so it's not an archive yet, but it will be soon, and it's going to be presented in Los Angeles this summer. So previously we've had click-based selection. Now we want to be able to extend this to text-based input. One reason we just saw click-based sometimes can be tedious, right? Clicks are very nice and precise and local, but also they can be tedious because they're local. You don't have expressive power. The other thing is they don't have, clicks don't encode semantic content maybe. So in this image, if you wanted to select the wood in the front, like this table in the left corner, if you had a model that accepts text prompts, this would be possible. With the click-based model, you would have to click, and then it would give you all the wood in the image, and you wouldn't be necessarily able to differentiate between the two. An additional observation that we had in MAO-AM, which is short for mask any object and material, by the way, is that materials always live on objects, right? Like the two are intercorrelated or whatever. One can't exist without the other. I've never seen a material just float in space anywhere. So here you have the input image on the left. You have text prompts in the middle, red, brown wood, dark brown wood, and brown X and white X and so on. But those those materials are a subregion of all the objects in the image. So the insight here was that maybe we can get better performance and gain performance if we can actually make the model use those two modalities because they share information and the model can share priors there. And yeah, the goal was prompt and click-based selection of materials and objects with a unified model. So when I say with a unified model, that means we need a model that can understand text, clicks, and images. And of course, as everybody does now, we use the VLM to do this. VLM can understand images and can reason about images and can also understand texts. And there also are some tricks to make it understand clicks. And it can output, if you pair it with a decoder, a selection mask. For example, here, if you click on the ceramic, it would give you the entire ceramic in the image, which is both cups. But if you actually specify which one you want by saying, can you select the white ceramic in the front? It's going to give you just the front part. And again, I don't want to talk too much about the details how we did this. The important thing again here was the training data. Because as of now, there has been no material data set of images rendered in scenes and dense and semantically meaningful text descriptions. So we had to set out and create such a data set. And at the scale you need, you can't do this manually, right? You have to have an automated pipeline. And Jaden really spent a lot of time making this work and thinking really hard about how to best tackle this problem. In the end, what we came up with and what works reasonably well is you have your data sets of images. Those can be the same ones that we used previously. And you have a VLM annotator that you task with, you're a material expert, please describe the material in this mask using blah, 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 like some certain vocabulary, certain key phrases, and so on. And then the VLM will say it's a towel made of cloth and gray and orange and whatnot. And if you set, again, it's a lot more involved than this. You can read the paper to find out more. But in the interest of time, this is the high level pitch, right? And if you set this up correctly, you actually can get really, really nice material descriptions with open source models. So I'm not sure whether you can read it on this slide, but some of those are really, really detailed and super, super good for learning, basically. So now we have this data set. Another thing that we figured out to make it work even better and to force the VLM to reason about materials is counterfactual learning. So if you give it a VQA task, you give it 3 wrong answers and 1 right. But the wrong answers aren't just wrong, they're subtly wrong. So they could be right, but we change some things to make them wrong. And again, some results. It's probably too much to take in at once, but my arm works on material selection here on clicks. We've seen this before, so we didn't lose this ability. We can still do that. It also works on text. So you can say the gray fabric, the brass metal, the bricks, the gray mesh, and so on. It also works on objects, again, via clicks, and also on objects via text. And again, this hasn't been super technical on the architectural side because I skipped those details. The lesson here is invest in data pipelines. I think more than half of this project was just getting the data pipeline to work and to work well, so we could generate that large data set and then train this model. Now, the next paper, and this is already 80% done, is VIT-MAT. And just a disclaimer, this is not from our group, so I'm not going to claim any credit for this. But this is awesome work, and if you don't know about it, you should definitely check it out. VIT-MAT is a paper called Boosting Image Matting with Pre-trained VITs. So matting is originally used for creating alpha mats for green screening, right? If you have detailed images or videos like this monkey here on the left, which has some fur, that's usually very hard for humans to mask out. It's very detailed and takes a lot of time, but you need a mask if you want to do green screening. And VIT-MAT gives you this mask, very precise boundary, and then you can do green screening things like this. This is a video from Corridor Key. I'm not sure if it plays well, but you can basically see that the guy is almost perfectly masked, even his like very fine hair, and you don't see any of the green screen behind it. So how VIT-MAT works is it takes as input the image, right, and a trimap. And a trimap is a map of 3 regions, black, white, and gray, where black tells you this is certainly not the object. This should definitely not be selected. White tells you this certainly is the object. So it could be inside the object. So this should be selected. And basically only touch the gray region because this is along the silhouette and this is where we're unsure. This is where we need detailed refinement. And then you get this very nice alpha mask on the right side. And we've been experimenting with this for material selection. And if you look at this example, that already looks quite good, right? But this is actually from the materialistic 2 model. However, that model operates at 1024. And if you zoom in, you can see that it's not quite perfect around those fine edges of the book here. Now, if you train a VIT-MET from materials and you run this, suddenly your selections become much better. So the takeaway here is to delegate subtasks to experts, dedicated experts, instead of having one model for everything. The lessons we've seen so far, it's on the data, multi-scale, invest in data pipelines, and delegate to subtasks. All build up to the last paper I want to talk about. This is the project that was actually presented at 3DV this year. And this is the SAMA paper that was actually done during my internship a year ago at Adobe Research. And SAMA is short for Select Any Material in 3D. So if you've been paying attention so far, you realize that previously we were only doing selection in image space, right? So on 2D images. And now the goal here in this paper is to extend it to 3D objects and assets. The problem is that 2D selection models, or any 2D model, is not necessarily 3D consistent. So if you run materialistic, for example, on this chair here, and just rotate the chair and render out an image for each rotation and run the model, you see that sorry, I don't know why the video is playing so bad, but you see that the selection is not very good, and it's of course not consistent. So in SAMA, we set out to fix this. We want to have 3D consistent material selection without pre-training in real time and on arbitrary 3D assets, Gaussians, NURBS, meshes. And the idea we had, or the insight of the paper, was that actually a 3D asset, if you render it from a bunch of cameras, if you render it out into different views, is not so different from a video, right? And we have good video selection models, for example, SAM2. So maybe we can use one of those to get our 3D selection more consistent. SAM2 works well for videos, again, but it can't do materials. So we need to adapt it to the material domain. And we did this by rendering a bunch of videos, again, with dense annotations. I hope those are playing more smoother than on my end because it's not very smooth. Sorry about that. Exactly. And now, once we've adapted SAM2 to the video, to the material domain, once we fine-tuned it, you see that the selection becomes much better and much more consistent in 3D space. Okay, so now we have our 3D consistent 2D video model that can do material selection. How do we actually go to 3D from a 2D video model? Well, that's kind of easy because now you have cameras and multi-view images. You can get 2D predictions for each image. And because you have the post-image information, you can back project this selection to 3D space. You get a 3D point cloud of similarity that lives on the object surface. And once you have a new view, you can go into the point cloud, query the nearest neighbors, and infer your selection mask from there. And before I wrap up, here are some results. Our model is on the left side, SAMA, and as you can see, the selection is most consistent across all those models. This is a screen grab of the GUI. So we support real-time inference. Here, there is nothing pre-computed or pre-optimized. I literally just loaded this asset. And it also works with any 3D asset, 3D Gaussians, NURBS, and also meshes. And it runs on consumer GPU. And you can see novel view synthesis or novel clicks here happen in real time. So the lesson here, I mean, that's not really a lesson, but I just wanted to highlight that in 3D, everything that you've been doing in 2D becomes significantly harder because you have to tackle multi-view consistency, disocclusions, view-dependent effects, and so on and so on. And this is it. This is the summary of these works. The lessons learned are, it's all on the data, multi-scale is important, invest in data pipelines, delegate subtasks to dedicated experts, and in 3D, everything is hard. And I'm not sure if we have time, but if there is time, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, there's a bunch of questions here in the Q&A. I'll select a few, and then if you wouldn't mind just maybe typing out the answers for the rest of them,
Of course.
that'd be great. So a couple questions here. I'll start with the questions from non-anonymous attendees. Varun is asking, in training in click-based material selection, what was the ground truth? Was it a masked image?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. And actually, yeah, you already said the answer. It was a masked image. Let me go back to that slide. Basically, how we train these models, we have this data that I mentioned that we rendered, and there we have dense per pixel annotations, right? Because this is synthetic data, you can just generate it. So during training, you would just sample an image. You would sample a click on an arbitrary region of the image. Oops. I might have clicked too often and now it's kind of buggy. Ah, yeah, okay. So here you would just sample a click on an arbitrary region of the image or of the mask, like here. And then this would be your ground truth. So basically you tell the model, this is the click, this is the image, give me something. And then the ground truth, you would just use a binary cross entropy or a standard classification or a regression loss on that. Yeah.
Question here from Adam Crespi. We're using Substance Designer with SDFs less than 3 to generate materials for CV fine-tuning, including annotations and segmentations, bypassing the usual tools like Blender, Unity, Omniverse, etc. Couldn't you do the same for your materials synthetic data, drawing on the vast Substance Assets library, plus any others you'd need to make? Also, is the output from your model a substance archive, or will it be eventually?
Okay, so there's two questions there. I guess the answer to the first one is yes, you can definitely do that. I myself am no expert in Substance. I know other people are, but I've been using Blender throughout like all my graphics career. So that was easiest for me, and that was what I was sticking with. I know that Substance is super powerful and that there is a large, large, large library of SDFs and of material maps and objects and all that kind of stuff. So if you're well versed with that, I guess you can definitely set up like a rendering script and get the exact same, probably even better results. Um, the answer to the second question, I'm not really sure I understand. Like maybe I need to clarify that the output of this model is not a material, right? It's a black and white mask, a binary selection mask. So I'm not sure how you would create a substance library of masks.
All right, thank you. Moving on to some of the other questions here. One is about, where does the material selection actually break? Is it translucent, reflective, or visually ambiguous materials, like, for example, wood-grained laminate? And how specific can the material selection be? Is it supposed to specify particular metal alloys, wood species, or polymer types?
Yeah, great question. Um, this has been asked, I think, in every single review we ever got for all the material selection papers. Um, Something that's notoriously hard is transparent and translucent materials, as you already mentioned. For example, glass. Because even as a human, right, what you want to select on such an image would be ambiguous. Do you want to select the carpet you see through the glass, or do you want to select literally the window or the glass itself? So that's ambiguous. We don't have a very good solution for that. That's an open research problem. The other thing is reflectivity. You can think of a mirror or a shiny chrome ball. And if you have a perfect mirror for the model, it's because the model operates in RGB space, right? So it's very, very hard to say that this is actually a reflection of something that might not even be in the frame. Um, yeah. And then what was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
Uh, how specific can the material selection
Hmm.
be?
Yeah, exactly. So this we've done a bunch of research on that in the SIGGRAPH paper this year, Mauam. And in that paper, we show cases where we do differentiate, and I think I have one on the slides actually, between vertically striped wood and horizontally striped wood with gray patterns and metal with speckle and metal with rust and so on. And I think that's key for actually being able to use this in software that will eventually be surfaced to users. Because obviously the real world appearance is rich, right? In my background, you can see several like gray panels, and you want to be able to specify that in more detail than just saying, oh, I want this gray thing or I want this wood thing. No, you want to be able to say, I want this fine-grained, vertically brown wood with like wooden knots or something. And that model actually supports that, yeah.
Question here is, can materialistic 2 determine if the dress is black and blue or gold and white without any pre-processing image optimizations? I guess this is a callback to that meme from a few years ago.
Yeah. That's a great question. I have actually not tried that, but I will. I don't know the answer. I would think it does, um, because it's operating in Dino space, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be an interesting experiment to run for sure.
And we'll do the last question here. In the architecture, the tile of the image is used for subtexture output, and downscaled image is used for the text output. Is that correct?
No, sorry, that was maybe an artifact of how the figure was layouted. Sorry, I can go back to the slide to make it a bit more clear. I think it's referring to this slide. And both the downscaled image and the tiles, so the insets, go into the same VIT processor, and I abstracted this away, but here we have image features and the tile features, and in this learned projection and fusion model here, they're all combined and processed together. So I can see how that confusion happens because downscale here is roughly on the same level as subtexture, but in fact they're not like, it's not that downscale is just subtexture and insets is texture. They're really like processed together.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thank you very much.